Namaskar, Jai Shri Krishna. Enunciating text 5, text 6, text 7, text 8 and text 9 of chapter 13, Dhritarashtra quits home of first canto creation of Srimad Bhagavatam. Text 5. Pratayuja jagamuha praharshena pranam tanva ivagatam abhisangamya vidhivata parishavangabhi vadanaiha. With great delight, they all approached him, as if life had returned to their bodies. They exchanged obeisances and welcomed each other with embraces. In the absence of consciousness, the limbs of the body remain inactive. But when consciousness returns, the limbs and senses become active, and existence itself becomes delightful. Vidur was so dear to the members of the Kaurav family that his long absence from the palace was comparable to inactivity. All of them were feeling acute separation from Vidur, and therefore his return to the palace was joyful for all. Text 6. Mumutsuha prema basha paugham virahauta kanthya kataraha raja tamara hayama chakre krutasana parigraham. Due to anxieties and long separation, they all cried out of affection. King Yudhishthir then arranged to offer sitting accommodations and a reception. Text 7. Tama bhuktavantam vishrantamasinam sukhamasane prashrayavanto raja praha tesham cha shrunavatam. After Vidur ate sumptuously and took sufficient rest, he was comfortably seated. Then the king began to speak to him, and all who were present there listened. King Yudhishthir was expert in reception also. Even in the case of his family members, Vidur was well received by all the family members by exchange of embraces and obeisances. After that, bathing and arrangements for a sumptuous dinner was made, and then he was given sufficient rest. After finishing his rest, he was offered a comfortable place to sit, and then the king began to talk about all happenings, both family and otherwise. That is the proper way to receive a beloved friend or even an enemy. According to Indian moral codes, even an enemy should be so well received that he will not feel any fearful situation. An enemy is always afraid of his enemy, but this should not be so when he is received at home by his enemy. This means that a person, when received at home, should be treated as a relative. So what to speak of a family member like Vidur, who was a well-wisher for all the members of the family. Thus Yudhishthir Maharaj began to speak in the presence of all the other members. Text 8. Yudhishthira uvacha api smartha no yushamata pakshacha chaya samedhitan vipada ganada vishaga nyadera mochita yatasama trukaha. Maharaj Yudhishthir said, "My uncle, do you remember how you always protected us along with our mother from all sorts of calamities? Your partiality, like the wings of a bird, saved us from poisoning and arson. Due to Pandu's death at an early age, his minor children and widow were the object of special care by all the elderly members of the family, especially Bhishma Dev and Mahatma Vidur. Vidur was more or less partial to the Pandavas due to their political position. Although Dhritarashtra was equally careful for the minor children of Maharaj Pandu, he was one of the intriguing parties who wanted to wash away the descendants of Pandu and replace them by raising his own sons to become the rulers of the kingdom. Mahatma Vidur could follow this intrigue of Dhritarashtra and company, and therefore, even though he was a faithful servitor of his eldest brother Dhritarashtra, he did not like his political ambition for the sake of his own sons. He was therefore very careful about the protection of the Pandavas and their widow mother. Thus he was, so to speak, partial to the Pandavas, preferring them to the sons of Dhritarashtra, although both of them were equally affectionate in his ordinary eyes. He was equally affectionate to both the camps of nephews in the sense that he always chastised Duryodhan for his intriguing policy against his cousins. He always criticized his elder brother for his policy of encouragement to his sons, and at the same time he was always alert in giving special protection to the Pandavas. All these different activities of Vidur within the palace politics made him well known as partial to the Pandavas. Maharaj Yudhishthir has referred to the past history of Vidur before his going away from home for a prolonged pilgrim's journey. Maharaj Yudhishthir reminded him that he was equally kind and partial to his grown-up nephews even after the battle of Kurukshetra, a great family disaster. Before the battle of Kurukshetra, Dhritarashtra's policy was peaceful annihilation of his nephews, and therefore he ordered Purochan to build a house at Varanavata, and when the building was finished, Dhritarashtra desired that his brother's family live there for some time. When the Pandavas were going there in the presence of all the members of the royal family, Vidur tactfully gave instructions to the Pandavas about the future plan of Dhritarashtra. This is specifically described in the Mahabharata, Adi Parva 114. He indirectly hinted a weapon not made of steel or any other element can be more than sharp to kill an enemy, and he who knows this is never killed. That is to say, he hinted that the party of the Pandavas was being sent to Varanavat to be killed, and thus he warned Yudhishthir to be very careful in their new residential palace. He also gave indications of fire and said that fire cannot extinguish the soul but can annihilate the material body. But one who protects the soul can live. Kunti could not follow such indirect conversations between Maharaj Yudhishthir and Vidur, and thus when she inquired from her son about the purport of the conversation, Yudhishthir replied that from the talks of Vidur it was understood that there was a hint of fire in the house where they were proceeding. Later on, Vidur came in disguise to the Pandavas and informed them that the housekeeper was going to set fire to the house on the 14th night of the waning moon. It was an intrigue of Dhritarashtra that the Pandavas might die altogether with their mother. And by his warning, the Pandavas escaped through a tunnel underneath the earth, so that their escape was also unknown to Dhritarashtra, so much so that after setting the fire, the Kauravas were so certain of the death of the Pandavas that Dhritarashtra performed the last rites of death with great cheerfulness. And during the mourning period, all the members of the palace became overwhelmed with lamentation, but Vidur did not become so because of his knowledge that the Pandavas were alive somewhere. There are many such instances of calamities, and in each of them, Vidur gave protection to the Pandavas on one hand, and on the other hand, he tried to restrain his elder brother from such intriguing policies. Therefore, he was always partial to the Pandavas, just as a bird protects its eggs by its wings. Text 9. Kaya vritya vartitam vashacha radabhiha shiti mandalam tirthani kshetramukhyani sevita niha bhutale. While traveling on the surface of the earth, how did you maintain your livelihood? At which holy places and pilgrimage sites did you render service? Vidur went out from the palace to detach himself from household affairs, especially political intrigues. As referred to herein before, he was practically insulted by Duryodhan's calling him a son of a Shudrani, although it was not out of place to talk loosely in the case of one's grandmother. Vidur's mother, although a Shudrani, was the grandmother of Duryodhan, and sometimes funny talks are allowed between grandmother and grandchildren, but because the remark was an actual fact, it was unpalatable talk to Vidur, and it was accepted as a direct insult. He therefore decided to quit his paternal house and prepare for the renounced order of life. This preparatory stage is called Vanaprastha Ashram, or retired life, for traveling and visiting the holy places on the surface of the earth. In the holy places of India like Vrindavan, Haridwar, Jagannath Puri and Prayaga, there are many great devotees, and there are still free kitchen houses for persons who desire to advance spiritually. Maharaj Yudhishthir was inquisitive to learn whether Vidur maintained himself by the mercy of the free kitchen houses, chhatras,